The reservation was for 2. The second chair had been empty for 20 minutes. Evelyn Carter did not check her phone again. She had already done that 4 times each glance, a small humiliation she refused to repeat. Around her, the restaurant hummed with quiet wealth, candlelight, low jazz, the soft clink of crystal. She had chosen this place deliberately, neutral ground, somewhere she could leave without a scene. She reached for her coat. That was when the door opened.
He was not what she expected.
His shirt was wrinkled at the collar. There was a faint trace of construction dust along his forearm that he hadn't fully scrubbed off. His phone was still open, a video call, the screen showing a small girl asleep against a pillow, her mouth slightly open, one hand curled under her cheek. He looked at Evelyn across the room. He didn't smile apologetically. He didn't rush. He simply walked over, pulled out the chair, and sat down.
"I didn't come late because I don't respect you," he said.
"I came late because my daughter needed me first." In that moment, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not warmth, not trust, but the faintest crack in something she had spent a long time building solid. She set her coat back down.
If you've ever built walls around your heart and wondered whether anyone was worth letting through, stay with this story. And if it moves you, consider subscribing. There's more where this came from. Evelyn Carter had not always been this careful. There was a version of her somewhere in her early 30s who had believed that love and ambition could coexist, that the right person would see her drive as something to admire rather than exploit. That version had been wrong. Not once, but repeatedly, and in ways that compounded like interest on a bad debt. The last man had been the most expensive lesson. His name was Daniel Marsh, and he had been charming in exactly the way Evelyn should have recognized as a warning sign. He talked about her intelligence, constantly praised her instincts in meetings, told her she was the most formidable woman he had ever known. For 14 months, she had believed it. Then her CFO quietly flagged 3 contracts, all signed through connections Evelyn had made, all quietly funneled through a subsidiary Daniel had registered 6 months into their relationship. He had never asked for her money directly. He had simply used her name like a door key over and over until she finally changed the locks. The part that stayed with her, the part she never talked about, not even with Claire, was not the money. It was the memory of a Tuesday morning sitting in her office after the CFO had left, looking at the documents spread across her desk and understanding that she had been studied, that someone had looked at her life, her network, her influence, and had seen not a person, but an infrastructure. That the intimacy she had believed in had been from the beginning a means to an end. She had not cried. She had called her lawyer, then her accountant, then her PR firm. She had handled it the way she handled everything, efficiently, thoroughly, without visible damage. But something had closed in her after that. Quietly, without ceremony, like a door easing shut in an empty house. She had not been in a serious relationship since. That was 3 years ago. And the only reason she was sitting in this restaurant tonight in this particular chair in front of this particular empty seat was Claire Bennett. Claire had been Evelyn's closest friend since college. The kind of person who was constitutionally incapable of watching someone she loved be unhappy without doing something about it. She had presented the idea of a blind date with the same energy she brought to everything, relentless, specific, and completely unbothered by Evelyn's initial refusal. "His name is Malcolm Hayes," Claire had said, setting her coffee cup down with the finality of someone closing a negotiation. "He runs a small construction and repair crew. He's a single father. His wife passed a few years ago. He has a 7-year-old daughter named Lila." She paused. "I know him through the Pattersons. After the flooding last spring, he came in to repair their back extension. The job ended up being twice what the contract covered. He didn't charge them a cent more." Evelyn had looked at her. "That could mean he's bad at business. Or it could mean he's decent," Claire said simply. "I know you've forgotten what that looks like." That had landed harder than Evelyn wanted to admit. She agreed to 1 hour. 1 drink. If it went nowhere, she was done. Not just with blind dates, but with the entire project of trying. She was 41 years old. She ran a logistics company with operations in 9 states, and she was tired of auditioning people who wanted proximity to what she had built,
rather than to who she was. Before Evelyn left that evening, Claire mentioned one more thing almost as an aside. His late wife's mother, Margaret, I think her name is, she still keeps close to Malcolm and Lila. From what I understand, she has a hard time accepting that life moves on. Just something to be aware of. Evelyn had nodded and filed it away without interest. It seemed irrelevant. It would not remain irrelevant. Malcolm Hayes arrived 20 minutes late. Evelyn had already decided to leave. She was standing, her coat half lifted from the back of her chair when he walked through the door. She noticed the shirt first, clean but wrinkled, like a man who had ironed it that morning and then lived a full day in it since. Then the dust along his forearm, faint and pale against his dark skin, the kind of residue that didn't fully wash off no matter how thoroughly you scrubbed. Then the phone still lit in his hand, showing a video call, a small girl asleep, cheek pressed to a pillow, breathing slow and even. He saw her. He didn't rush. He walked to the table, put his phone face down with the call still running, and sat. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said. Not, "I'm so sorry," not the extended performance of guilt she had learned to distrust, just the statement, clean and direct. Lila had a low fever at school. Her caretaker called. I had to get her home and settled with my neighbor before I could come. He looked at Evelyn steadily. "I'm not asking you to overlook it. If you'd rather end the evening here, I understand." Evelyn stood still for a moment. She had heard 100 explanations from men who were late. She had a reliable internal system for sorting them, the ones designed to make her feel guilty for being inconvenienced, the ones that were performances of sensitivity, the ones that were simply lies dressed up in plausible detail. What she had never heard before was a man state a fact, accept a consequence, and then stop talking. She sat back down. "One drink," she said. "We'll see." What followed was 2 hours she had not planned for. Malcolm did not ask about her company. He did not ask what she was worth or who she knew or whether she had contacts in commercial real estate. He talked about his work, the particular satisfaction of fixing something structural, of knowing a wall would hold because he had built it correctly. He talked about Lila with the specific, unhurried tenderness of a man for whom fatherhood was not a role, but a fact of life as fundamental as breathing. He talked about keeping promises, about how he had learned that a man's word was the only currency that didn't appreciate. Evelyn found herself listening in a way she had not listened to anyone in a long time. She tested him once early, mentioned a contract she'd just closed, a significant one, let the number sit in the air between them. Malcolm nodded and said, "That's a lot of moving parts to coordinate. How do you manage the handoff points?" He was asking about the logistics, not the money, not the access, the actual work. She had not expected that. When the evening ended and they stood on the sidewalk under the edge of the restaurant's awning, the rain still coming down in thin sheets, Malcolm did not ask for her number. He did not offer to walk her to her car. He simply said it had been good to meet her and meant it and turned to go. "Maybe we should do this again," Evelyn said. She was aware, even as she said it, that she was the one asking. Malcolm looked back at her. Something in his expression was quiet and unhurried, the look of a man who did not need to win, only to know. "I'd like that," he said. The second date was at a diner called Rudy's. It was the kind of place that had been on the same corner for 30 years. Vinyl booths, laminated menus, a pie display case by the register with 3 varieties rotating on a slow turntable. Malcolm was already there when Evelyn arrived, sitting in a corner booth with Lila's backpack on the seat beside him. He had come straight from picking her up at school, he explained, and his neighbor had agreed to watch her for the evening. He had left the backpack in the car by mistake. Evelyn looked at the diner, at the backpack, at the slightly harried quality around Malcolm's eyes that she was beginning to recognize as his baseline, not stress exactly, but the constant low-level alertness of a man managing more than one life at a time. She sat down across from him and picked up the laminated menu. "I haven't been to a place like this in years," she said. "Is that a problem?" "No," she said, and found to her mild surprise that she meant it. Over the following 3 weeks, Evelyn learned what it meant to be in orbit around a man whose primary gravity was elsewhere. There was the evening their dinner was interrupted at 40 minutes by a phone call. Lila had dropped her pencil case at school and was convinced, with the absolute certainty of a 7-year-old, that her father would be disappointed. Malcolm had taken the call without apology, spoken to his daughter for 4 minutes, in a voice so patient and steady it was almost disorienting to witness, and then returned to his soup as though nothing unusual had occurred. There was the Saturday afternoon they had planned to visit a bookstore together, which ended when Lila woke from a nap with a nightmare she couldn't shake and needed her father present. Malcolm had texted Evelyn with a simple, "Something came up with Lila. Rain check." No over-explanation, no guilt-laden paragraph, just the fact. Evelyn had stared at that text for longer than she should have. She was accustomed to being the most important thing in any room she entered. Not out of vanity, it was simply the structural reality of her position. People adjusted their schedules for her. They returned her calls first. They leaned toward her in meetings. And now here was a man who, with complete calm and zero malice, simply did not reorganize his priorities around her presence. It irritated her. And then slowly, it did something else. She began to notice the texture of what Malcolm was actually doing. The way he spoke about Lila, not as a burden or a complication, but as the clearest point on his internal compass. The way he never used his daughter to perform vulnerability for Evelyn's benefit, never brought Lila up in a way that seemed calculated to make himself seem more sympathetic. He simply lived as a father openly and without theater, and let Evelyn observe it or not as she chose. What she also noticed in those weeks were the smaller things. The way Malcolm remembered details she had mentioned only once, the name of a difficult client she'd referenced in passing, the coffee order she'd had at their first meeting, the fact that she found overhead lighting in restaurants headache-inducing. He never made a production of remembering, he just acted on it quietly, the way people do when they are actually paying attention, rather than constructing an impression. One evening, they were walking back to her car after dinner when it started raining without warning. Malcolm didn't make a show of it, didn't dramatically offer his jacket or pull her under an awning with practiced gallantry. He simply shifted position so that he was on the side where the wind was driving the rain harder, without saying anything about it at all. Evelyn noticed. She didn't say anything either, but she thought about it for the rest of the night. She chose to observe it all. And what she saw frightened her in a way that Daniel Marsh's charm never had, because this was not performance. This was character. And character, she had learned, was far harder to walk away from than charisma. 3 weeks in, Evelyn tested him. She did it deliberately, though she would not have admitted that to anyone, including Claire. They were at dinner, Rudy's again, because Malcolm had a loyalty to familiar things, and Evelyn began talking about the quarter she'd just closed. She mentioned the revenue figure. She mentioned the name of a senator who had attended her company's annual gala. She mentioned that her former colleague had just been appointed to a federal logistics advisory board, partly through her recommendation. She laid it out like a spread of cards, watching. Malcolm listened. He finished chewing. He said, "That's a lot of influence to carry. Does it ever get heavy?" Evelyn blinked. "What do you mean?" "People who need something from you," he said without any particular edge to it. "After a while, it must be hard to know which relationships are real." The table went quiet. It was not the response she had prepared for. She had prepared for envy or calculation, or the particular brand of competitive masculine deflection she had encountered so many times. The pivot to his own accomplishments, the subtle repositioning. Instead, Malcolm had looked directly at the thing she never talked about and named it without drama. She recovered, changed the subject. But the question stayed with her long after the check was paid. Later that week, he said something she wrote down when she got home, which was not something she had done since she was in her 20s. They had been talking about a repair job that had gone sideways, a client who kept moving the goalposts, demanding work outside the contract and then disputing the invoice. Malcolm had handled it, he said, by returning to first principles. "A wall either holds or it doesn't," he said. "You can argue about the price, but you can't argue about whether it's standing." I'd rather build something that lasts and get paid less than cut corners and spend the next 5 years defending it." He paused. "I think that's true for most things. The value of a person isn't in what they own. It's in what they protect when no one's watching." Evelyn had looked at him across the table. She had met men worth 10 times what Malcolm Hayes would ever earn. She had sat across from them in boardrooms and at charity dinners and in restaurants considerably more expensive than Rudy's. Not one of them had ever seemed as solid to her as this man in a slightly wrinkled shirt, explaining his philosophy of construction like it was the most natural thing in the world. It unnerved her. It also made her want to stay. She met Lila on a Thursday afternoon. It was unplanned. Malcolm had mentioned he was picking Lila up from school, and Evelyn had said without fully thinking it through that she could meet him nearby. When she arrived at the school gate, Malcolm was already there, and beside him, holding his hand and eating a graham cracker with focused concentration, was a small girl with her father's watchful eyes and a gap between her 2 front teeth. Lila looked at Evelyn with the direct, unfiltered assessment that only young children and very confident adults could pull off. "Are you Dad's friend?" she asked. "Yes," Evelyn said. "I'm Evelyn." Lila considered this. "Do you make him laugh a lot?" The question hit Evelyn somewhere she wasn't expecting. She glanced at Malcolm, who was looking at his daughter with an expression that was equal parts affection and helplessness. She looked back at Lila. "I'm working on it," she said. Lila seemed to find this an acceptable answer. She offered Evelyn the second half of her graham cracker. Evelyn, who had not eaten a graham cracker in approximately 20 years, accepted it. On the walk to Malcolm's truck, Evelyn was quiet. The question had opened something she needed to think about. This was not simply a matter of whether she trusted Malcolm or whether she was willing to be vulnerable again after Daniel. It was larger than that. Lila was 7 years old and had already lost her mother. She was a child who asked whether her father laughed enough, which meant she was paying attention, which meant she would notice everything, which meant that anyone who entered this family and then left would leave a mark. Evelyn understood with sudden clarity that the stakes here were not just her own. That night alone in her apartment, she sat with that understanding and felt the familiar pull of retreat. She was 41 years old. She was not someone who had ever been particularly natural with children. She did not know how to be a soft presence in someone's life. She had spent 20 years learning how to be a hard one because hard had kept her safe. She did not call Malcolm that night, but she did not pull away either. She simply sat with the discomfort and let it be what it was. It was a Tuesday when she saw Margaret Hale for the first time. She and Malcolm were walking toward Lila's school together, one of those spontaneous arrangements that had started to feel natural, when Evelyn noticed a woman standing on the far side of the schoolyard fence. She was well-dressed, 60 or so, with the kind of posture that came from decades of holding oneself together. She was watching Malcolm and Lila with an expression Evelyn couldn't fully read from that distance. Malcolm saw her too. He lifted his chin in a brief, neutral acknowledgement. The woman did not wave. She simply watched. "Who is that?" Evelyn asked. "Margaret Hale," Malcolm said. "Diana's mother." He kept his voice even. "She likes to see Lila when she can. I don't have a problem with that." A pause. "She has a harder time with other things." "Like what?" "Like the idea that life keeps going." Evelyn nodded and didn't press it. But she noticed the way Malcolm's jaw had set slightly, and she noted Margaret's stillness, the way the woman hadn't moved, hadn't smiled, had only watched. 2 weeks later, Margaret appeared again, this time deliberately. Evelyn was at an industry networking event when she noticed the same woman moving through the room with the quiet purposefulness of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Margaret approached her at the drinks table, introduced herself graciously, and spent 20 minutes talking about Diana, about Lila as an infant, about the years of Malcolm and Diana's marriage. She was warm, measured, and specific in a way that made everything she said feel credible. Near the end of the conversation, she said almost as an afterthought, "I just hope Malcolm finds someone right for him. Not for financial security for Lila's sake. That little girl needs stability more than anything." Evelyn had nodded politely and moved on. But the sentence had gone in. 3 days later, the letter arrived at Evelyn's office. It came in a standard envelope, handwritten return address included. The name on the back read, Margaret Hale. Evelyn opened it at her desk between two meetings, assuming it was some kind of formal introduction. An olive branch, maybe, or a polite request to meet. It was neither. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten in a careful, measured script. Margaret did not begin with hostility. She began with warmth, memories of Diana, of the family Malcolm and her daughter had tried to build of Lila as an infant. It was written with the kind of specific tenderness that was impossible to fabricate, and Evelyn found herself reading slowly, her guard lowered without her noticing. Then, midway through the second page, the register shifted. Margaret mentioned a life insurance payout. A significant one, she wrote, received after Diana's death. She did not call Malcolm dishonest. She was far too careful for that. She simply noted with apparent reluctance that Malcolm had struggled financially in the years since that the insurance money had not seemed to resolve much, and that she had noticed with concern, not accusation, that he had a pattern of allowing women with resources to enter his life during difficult periods. I don't believe Malcolm is a bad man, she wrote near the end. I simply believe that a man who has known financial precarity long enough will, without even meaning to, seek stability wherever he can find it. I share this not to harm him, but because I believe you deserve to know what you may be walking into. She signed it with her full name. Evelyn read the letter twice. She should have called Malcolm. She knew that even in the moment, knew it the way she knew most things, clearly and without ambiguity in the part of her mind that was not currently flooding with 3 years of accumulated fear. But the letter had not arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. It had arrived on the evening she had returned from a meeting where she discovered that a former business partner had been using her company's name in a funding pitch without authorization. The same quiet, leveraged betrayal she had lived through with Daniel. She was already raw, already back inside the old architecture of distrust. And Margaret had not written like an enemy. She had written like a woman who loved a child and was frightened. She had used real names, real details, a real return address. She had not made accusations, she had raised concerns. And she had known about the insurance payout, which was not public information. That specificity was what closed the door in Evelyn's chest. A stranger could lie. A stranger with accurate details felt like evidence. She folded the letter. She put it in her desk drawer. And that night she called Malcolm. She did not tell him about the letter. She told him in a voice she had practiced into steadiness over many years that she thought they were moving in different directions. That the distance between their lives, not just economically but structurally, was too wide to bridge. That it was better to stop before things became more complicated. Malcolm was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I can live with you not choosing me, but I don't want my daughter to learn that love is a place where people have to keep proving they're innocent. Evelyn said nothing. Take care of yourself, Evelyn, he said. He hung up first. She sat in her living room for a long time after that. The apartment was quiet in the way that expensive apartments were always quiet, insulated, sealed, designed to keep the outside world at a distance. She had paid a great deal of money for that quiet. Tonight it felt less like peace and more like a verdict. She had won. She had protected herself. She had made the rational decision with the available information, and no one who knew her history could reasonably fault her for it. She sat with that victory for a long time. It did not feel the way winning usually felt. She went back to work. That was what Evelyn Carter did when something hurt, she worked. She had been doing it since her late 20s when she had first learned that a full calendar was the most reliable anesthetic available without a prescription. She scheduled back-to-back meetings. She flew to Chicago for a 2-day operations review that could have been handled by her VP. She attended 3 industry dinners in 1 week and sat at the center of each table and said exactly the right things to exactly the right people. It worked the way it always worked in the hours while she was doing it. Then she would get into the car or step into the elevator or sit down at her desk in the 40 minutes before the building filled up and the quiet would come back. And in the quiet, Malcolm was there. Not dramatically, not the way Heartbreak announced itself in films with its grand gestures and its collapsing music. It was smaller than that. It was the memory of a diner booth and a laminated menu, It was the specific sound of his voice when he talked to Lila on the phone, that unhurried patience, that steadiness that never seemed performed. It was the way he had shifted position in the rain without saying a word about it. It was the question he had asked her at dinner. Does it ever get heavy? No one had ever asked her that before. Not once in 41 years. She told herself she had made the right decision. She told herself this with the same precision she brought to financial projections, methodically, repeatedly building the case brick by brick. Margaret had known details. Margaret had used a real name and a real address. Margaret had written with restraint rather than venom, which was the kind of restraint that came from truth rather than malice. She believed this for 11 days. On the 12th day, she took the letter out of her desk drawer and read it again. This time, she read it the way she read contracts. The difference was significant. The first time, she had read it as a woman primed for betrayal, and it had confirmed what she feared. This time, she read it as a CEO who had spent 2 decades identifying language designed to steer rather than inform. And what she found, once she stopped responding emotionally and started reading structurally, was that the letter contained no facts. It contained details wrapped around implications. It named the insurance payout without stating what it had been used for. It described a pattern without citing a single specific instance. It expressed concern without ever making a claim that could be verified or refuted. It was, she realized, an exceptionally well-constructed piece of manipulation. The kind that worked precisely because it never crossed the line into accusation. The kind that left the reader doing the damaging work themselves. She sat with that recognition for a long time. Then she called Claire. "I need you to find out what you can about a life insurance payout Malcolm Hayes received after his wife died," she said. "Whatever is findable. Take a few days if you need to." Claire was quiet for a moment. "Evelyn, what's going on?" "I'll explain when you call me back." Claire called back in 2 days. What she had found was not complicated once someone looked. Diana Hayes had been sick for nearly 2 years before she died a progressive illness that had required multiple hospitalizations, 2 surgeries, and an extended period of in-home care. The medical debt at the time of her death had been substantial. Malcolm had paid it in full within 6 months of receiving the insurance payout. The remainder had gone toward structural repairs on the house, the roof, the foundation, a section of the back wall that had been compromised, and a savings account in Lila's name designated for educational expenses. There was no hidden subsidiary, no pattern of financial dependence, no second life running quietly beneath the surface. Just a man who had paid his dead wife's bills, fixed his daughter's home, and saved what was left for her future. Evelyn sat at her desk after she hung up and did not move for a long time. She thought about what that insurance money had actually represented. Not a windfall, not a resource Malcolm had been quietly hoarding, but the final accounting of a devastating loss. She thought about him sitting down to pay those hospital bills one by one, calling contractors to fix the roof so Lila would have a dry room to sleep in, opening a savings account in his daughter's name and putting money into it that he could have spent on himself, on his business, on any number of things a man raising a child alone might reasonably need. She thought about Margaret Hale standing at the schoolyard fence watching, about the industry event and how deliberate that approach had been, about the letter and how precisely it had been aimed. Margaret had met her. Margaret had known her name, her workplace, her connection to Malcolm. She had known when and where Evelyn would be that evening. None of that was accidental. None of it was a concerned grandmother acting on instinct. That was not grief. That was strategy. And Evelyn, who prided herself on reading people and situations with surgical clarity, had missed it entirely, because the letter had found the one door in her that was still unlocked. The door marked, "You will be used again." She had not been deceived by Margaret's argument. She had been deceived by her own fear. That night, Evelyn did not go to a dinner, did not open her laptop, did not call anyone. She sat in her living room with the lights on low and let herself think about Lila. 7 years old, gap-toothed and watchful. A child who monitored whether her father was laughing enough, which meant she had already learned at 7 to read the emotional weather of the people she loved. a child who had lost her mother, and still on a Thursday afternoon outside a school gate offered a stranger half of a graham cracker. Evelyn thought about what Lila had asked the first time they met. "Do you make him laugh a lot?" She thought about what Malcolm had said the night she ended things, the last sentence before he hung up. "I don't want my daughter to learn that love is a place where people have to keep proving they're innocent." She had taken that sentence away from a child who was already paying close attention. Not deliberately, not cruelly, but the effect was identical either way. She sat with that truth for a long time without trying to soften it or reframe it, or find the mitigating circumstances that would let her off the hook. She had made a mistake. A specific, consequential mistake that had hurt a man who did not deserve it and unsettled a little girl who had already absorbed more loss than most adults ever would. The question was not whether she could undo it. The question was what she was willing to do now. By the time she finally went to bed, she already knew the answer. She drove to the job site on a Friday morning. She did not call ahead. She did not send a message. She wore what she had on a dark blazer, work trousers, no armor beyond that, and she drove to the address she had for Malcolm's current project, a building renovation in a neighborhood she rarely passed through. And she parked and got out and walked across the gravel lot toward the sound of power tools. Malcolm saw her before she reached him. He was on the ground level reviewing something on a clipboard, and he went still when he looked up. He did not come toward her. He waited. She walked up and stopped a few feet away. "I owe you the truth," she said, "and an apology." He said nothing. He held the clipboard at his side and looked at her with an expression that was not cold, but was not open either. It was the look of a man who had decided not to spend energy on anticipation. She told him about the letter. All of it. How it had arrived. What it had said. Why she had believed it. She told him about the timing. About the business partner who had betrayed her that same week. About the way Margaret's careful language had found the exact fault line in her and pressed. She did not frame it as an excuse. She presented it as an explanation. The difference being that one asked for absolution and the other only asked to be understood. When she finished, Malcolm looked down at the clipboard. He was quiet for long enough that she heard two other workers talking somewhere behind her, a drill starting and stopping. "She's done things like this before," he said finally. "Not to anyone I was dating, there wasn't anyone before you, but with other things. With decisions about Lila's schooling, about holidays. Margaret loves Lila, I don't doubt that. But she also believes that loving someone gives you the right to manage them." He paused. "I should have told you more about her before it got to this. I spoke to Margaret after you called. She won't be reaching out to you again. It was my decision to believe it without asking you," Evelyn said. "That's on me." He looked at her then, really looked the way he had looked at her across the restaurant on the first night, steady and unhurried. "Lila asked about you," he said. 3 times in the first week. Then she stopped asking, which was worse. Evelyn absorbed that. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that sometimes adults need time to figure things out." A long pause. "I wasn't sure it was true. I'm asking you for a chance to start over," Evelyn said. "Not to fix everything at once. Not to make some gesture that makes us even. I'm asking to start again slower and more honestly, without me using you as a test case for every man who hurt me before you." She held his gaze. "I know you don't owe me that. I know I didn't earn it. I'm asking anyway." The Friday morning moved around them, gravel and wind and the distant noise of the site. "If you come back into Lila's life," Malcolm said, "you stay. I'm not asking you to make promises about the future. I'm asking you to understand that she will notice if you leave again, and it will matter to her. So before you decide, make sure you're deciding because you're ready, not because you feel guilty." "I know the difference," Evelyn said. "I need you to be certain." "I am." He studied her for another moment. Then something in his posture shifted, not much, but enough. The slight unbending of a man who had been holding himself carefully together and was choosing cautiously to ease. "Okay," he said. She brought Lila a book the following Saturday. It was the one Lila had mentioned in passing during their walk from the school. A story about a girl who builds a boat and sails to a city made of clouds. Evelyn had tracked it down through 3 different bookstores. She arrived at Malcolm's house in the late morning with it tucked under her arm and nothing else. She knocked. Malcolm opened the door first, then stepped aside. Behind him, Lila appeared in the hallway, already watching with those careful eyes. Malcolm put a hand lightly on his daughter's shoulder, a quiet signal that it was okay, and Lila moved to the door. She looked at Evelyn. She looked at the book. She looked back at Evelyn. "You found it," she said. "I looked for it," Evelyn said. Lila took the book carefully with both hands, the way children handle things they consider serious. Then she looked up. "Are you sorry for making my dad sad?" Evelyn crouched down so they were at eye level. "Yes," she said. "I'm very sorry. It was my fault and it won't happen again." Lila considered this with the gravity of a judge. Then she stepped back from the door and said, "You can come in. Dad made pancakes and there are some left." What followed was not a transformation. It was something quieter and more durable than that. Evelyn did not become a different person. She remained exacting and driven, and occasionally difficult to reach when a deadline was bearing down. Malcolm did not change either. He remained unhurried and principled, and entirely unbothered by the distance between their bank accounts in the way that only a man who had truly made peace with himself could be. But things shifted in the smaller register, and the smaller register turned out to matter more than either of them had expected. Evelyn started leaving her phone in her bag during dinners. Not always she was still a CEO and the world did not pause for her personal development, but often enough that it became a deliberate choice rather than an oversight. She learned the rhythms of Lila's week, the Tuesday library visits, the Friday afternoon soccer practice, the way the girl needed 20 minutes of quiet after school before she was ready to talk about her day. She showed up for those things. Not grandly, just consistently. There was an afternoon in early December when Lila's soccer team lost badly, and Lila sat on the bench afterward, refusing to move her shin guards. Still on her face, fixed in the particular expression of a child trying very hard not to cry in public. Malcolm crouched beside her and said something quietly. Lila didn't respond. Then Evelyn sat down on the bench on Lila's other side, not saying anything, not trying to fix it. And after a few minutes, Lila leaned slightly in her direction, the way children do when they have decided without announcing it that someone is safe. Malcolm caught Evelyn's eye over the top of Lila's head. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. There was a Sunday morning when Evelyn arrived at the house to find Malcolm's truck blocked in by a neighbor's car and a repair job that needed to start in 40 minutes. Without being asked, Evelyn called the neighbor, located the owner, and had the situation resolved in 12 minutes. Malcolm watched her work the phone with the focused efficiency of someone who had spent 20 years getting things done, and when she hung up, he said in a tone of genuine appreciation, "That was something." "I have my uses," she said. He laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded and unhurried. Lila, who was in the kitchen eating cereal, heard it and looked up. Small things, ordinary things, the kind that don't make good stories but make good lives. On a Thursday evening in November, Evelyn drove to Malcolm's house in the rain. She had just come from the office. A contract she had been negotiating for 4 months had finally closed the kind of deal that would have sent her to a celebratory dinner with her board 2 years ago. Instead, she had gotten in her car and driven across town without entirely deciding to. She let herself in with the key Malcolm had given her the week before, a small moment neither of them had made a ceremony of, which was exactly right. The house was quiet in the way that homes are quiet when the people inside are simply at rest. Lila was asleep on the couch, one sock on and one sock off, the Cloud City book open across her chest, one hand curled under her cheek the same way she had slept in that video call on the very first night, the night Evelyn had almost walked out of a restaurant and back into her careful, protected, perfectly insulated life. From the kitchen came the smell of something simple, broth noodles, the particular warmth of a small stove in a small house on a rainy night. She could see the light on over the range. She could see Malcolm's back still in his work clothes, moving without hurry. He heard her come in. He didn't turn around right away. "Hey," he said to the pot on the stove. "Hey," she said to the room. Then he turned and looked at her the way he had been looking at her since the very first night, unhurried, clear, without agenda. "Have you eaten?" he asked. Evelyn set her bag down by the door. She looked at Lila on the couch. She looked back at Malcolm. "No," she said. "Not yet." She walked into the kitchen. For the first time in longer than she could accurately remember, she was not a CEO. She was not a woman with a history of damage running a diagnostic on every room she entered. She was not armor and strategy and the accumulated scar tissue of learning not to trust. She was simply someone who had been waited for. There's something this story keeps returning to, and it's worth saying plainly. Malcolm Hayes was not a perfect man. He wasn't wealthy, he wasn't polished, and he couldn't give Evelyn the kind of life that looked impressive from the outside. What he offered was something rarer, the experience of being seen without being assessed, of being in a room with someone who wanted nothing from her except her actual presence. And Evelyn, brilliant, guarded, genuinely accomplished, nearly missed it. Not because she was foolish, but because she had been hurt enough times that her defenses had stopped distinguishing between threats and gifts. That's the thing about walls. They don't check credentials at the door. The real lesson here isn't about rich and poor, or even about second chances. It's about the difference between protecting yourself and imprisoning yourself. About recognizing when the armor that once kept you safe has started keeping everyone else out too, including the people who never wanted to hurt you in the first place. Real love doesn't arrive to rescue you or complete you or fix everything that came before. It arrives quietly in a wrinkled shirt 20 minutes late with a completely honest reason. It sits across from you in a vinyl booth and asks the question no one else thought to ask. It shifts position in the rain without making a thing of it. It says in a kitchen on a Thursday night, "Have you eaten?" And somehow, after everything, that is enough. More than enough. That's worth more than any contract ever signed. If this story stayed with you, if any part of Evelyn's journey felt familiar, we'd love to have you along for more. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you never miss a story. Every week we bring you narratives about real human things. Love, trust, the courage it takes to try again, and the quiet moments that change everything. We'll see you in the next one.